1, 2, 1. There we go. Sorry about that, everybody. We are here, Royal Lines UK, of course. Matthew Turner, Ashley Soden. We're just waiting on Nolan to come and say hello. He says he's been logged out of Twitter on his computer, so he's going to be along in just a second. We are going to be here with Nolan Bianchi of the Detroit News in just a moment. If you have any questions for Nolan, please get them in here. It'd be great to give your questions to him as we're going to chat about his career and about the Detroit Lions in the next 30 minutes or so. Hope everyone's had a good week. We're going to be following this up shortly after this interview's concluded with the Detroit Lions schedule reaction part 1. We're going to be taking a little bit more of an in-depth look at how the season might shake out. Going to be looking at the first 7 unique games in this first episode of it. In the second episode, we'll be looking at the second set of unique games, so we're not going to be covering any one twice. Should be a good show. We've done that every year, and I think it's nice because, you know, the schedule is to be difficult. But, you know, if those teams haven't drafted particularly well, if they've lost some coordinators, all that sort of stuff, then things may not be entirely as they seem. And we know that, of course, teams go from bad to good and good to bad pretty quickly. So looks can be deceiving, and that is the point of that show. But we will be welcoming Nolan on in just a moment. How are you, Ash? What's the best 40-yard dash you guys can do in the chat? I don't know whether I can do better than a 5.65 40, to be honest, but I am, and this is a technical term, a tuballard, as Nolan is about to come in now. Hey, he's got the LFC top on. I love it. How are you doing, Nolan? Doing well. I'm actually going up this weekend for the, although I didn't get tickets for the Palace game, but for the trophy parade on Monday. It should be great. Can't wait, especially just since we didn't have one during COVID, so. I haven't a clue. They close off a lot of the streets in Liverpool. I think that during the Champions League parade, there was about 1 million people. So should be quite a lot. I mean, so we both went to the draft for Detroit last year, and I think that was, well, what was the one day total amount? It was what, 275,000 people in a day, was it? Yeah, so 4 times that. It's going to be insane.
We got a Super Bowl parade. That would be probably something right in that same wheelhouse.
Apologies for the people in the chat about the issues with the audio. I turned it off and turned it on again, and now it works. Oh, I'm going to hit record on the audio part of this, Nolan, and then I was thinking about half an hour. I know you said you're not precious for time, so that's great.
Yeah, no, whatever. I got some questions for you guys too, so you know, don't feel like we gotta rush through it or anything like that. But yeah,
of course. Okay. Yes, guys in the chat, I know I've put it in the header already, but if you've got any questions for Nolan, please just put them in as they occur, especially if they're on theme. That would be great, and then we'll just keep going with the flow. Otherwise, we're all good to go. So let's do this.
Recording in progress.
Welcome to a special edition of the Royal Lines UK podcast. It's the first in a new series called On the Beat. We are here with Nolan Bianchi. I'm Matthew Turner. He is Ashley Soden. Nolan, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's really cool to know that the Lions have a fan base all over the world, and definitely respect what you guys do. I listened to a couple episodes kind of in advance for coming on, and you guys do a great show. So absolutely happy to do it, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Did you actually listen to a couple of the 3.5 hour ones? Because we talk a lot.
None of the 3.5 hour ones, but I listened to the most recent two, and they're
Appreciate
really
that.
good. But trust me, I'm in the same boat when it comes to going long on podcasts. If anybody out there has ever listened to my podcast with Richard Silva, Gridiron Gang, I think I say at the end or the start of every episode, like I think this is going to be a short episode today, and then next thing you know, like we're an hour and 15 minutes, which isn't the longest episode in the world, but when you're planning to only go 30 or 45, you're went a little longer than I thought. So I get it.
I tell my girlfriend that, and then we start like 7:30 local time, and we'd get in, and after the editing, I'm going to bed past midnight, and she's like, "It happened again, didn't it?" Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's just how it goes. Once everybody starts cooking, it would be a shame to cut off the conversation sometimes. So yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to, in this series, kind of maybe shine a light on some of the beat writers that obviously, us especially from the outside, we see everything that you do in terms of the writing. We might hear you on the mic, although very quietly. It's still something I'd love the Lions to fix in terms of being able to hear the questions at a press conference, which is a bane of frustration on my point. But hey,
It sounds like they are. I don't know. I think the most recent or not podcast, most recent availability. I think somebody texted me and was like, they finally fixed the volume. So hopefully that's something that's been remedied because yeah, that's something I hear a lot from friends, from family, from people I've never even met before. So yeah.
I'm glad it's universal, but so everyone can get an insight into the lives of the people that we listen to and read the writing of. So to start with you, Nolan, you went to Oakland University, which is obviously Michigan local university, to do journalism and creative writing. You graduated 7 years ago or so, I believe.
Yes, 7 years ago. Hard to believe it's gone that quickly, but yeah, as of last month, it was 7 years ago.
That is absolutely crazy. And so you were a color commentator for the uni hockey team. I read somewhere that you played 4 minutes for the lacrosse team or something like
That's
that.
right. Well, I don't know where you got this, but this is great research on your guys' end. Yeah, I played club lacrosse in college, and I didn't play lacrosse before I got to college, and so naturally I didn't get a lot of playing time. I kind of just did it to have fun with friends, but we were beating some team like 19-0 one game, and they were finally like, all right, the lead is safe enough for you to see some action. And they threw me out there, and one of my good friends on the team, he did everything. He like ducked around like three guys, whatever. I was wide open in front of the net. He just put it right in my stick, and I levered it in there. I wouldn't even call it like a real shot, but it's in there. I still have the ball somewhere, and yeah, college athlete. That's me.
The only thing I can remember about lacrosse is I think Logan Thomas was a lacrosse player when he came over.
I'm Kennedy.
There we go. I don't know whether you've ever played with any of the Lions guys. I don't know if there's a no.
No, those guys were leagues above me. Like I said, this was more to pay to play. We were doing fundraisers, we were doing all sorts of stuff to pay for our dues, but definitely no real competition. But that's a brutal sport. Like I played pretty much every sport for at least a little bit. I played 1 year of football when I was in ninth grade, and I would probably put it right up there with football in terms of just like the brutality of it because those sticks are real. Like they hurt, and you're allowed to just beat people with it as long as you like make some thinly veiled attempt to look like you're actually going for the ball. So I've had friends a lot of this never happened to me because I didn't get into the games long enough to experience it, but like have plenty of friends who just like carrying the ball up the field and all of a sudden, bam, broken wrist from a stick, and yeah, it's brutal.
Oh man, that sounds really hard. I have never played the game, but I used to go to a school that had lacrosse, and yeah, the guys came off looking bloodied quite often. So yeah,
That's right.
what did you always want to be a journalist? Obviously, you did that at school. So was that something that you kind of grew up knowing that you wanted, knowing that you wanted to do?
It is not. I started the business school in college and it just seemed like the practical thing to do. I didn't have any like real aspirations in terms of what I wanted to do with my life and just thought I would choose the safe thing. But I was not very good at it. And so I think it was like my sophomore year. I was already struggling kind of just with like accounting classes and stuff like that. And I wasn't doing very well. And I had a meeting with my advisor of like, hey, all right, next year business school is supposed to start. And right now you are not eligible to get into the business school because your GPA is so low. And then I got a bunch of my finals back. And I remember I got like a 1.2 in my stats class. And I was like, man, I didn't feel anything, which I knew was the problem. Because I've taken school semi-seriously for most of my life, or at least feared the idea of failing. So, it was kind of that summer. I was like, I need to find something else. I actually went into creative writing first. I wanted to be like a screenwriter of sorts. I wanted to write like sitcoms and stuff like that. Was really inspired by It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. That was kind of one of the shows that was like a catalyst for me. And so I started off in that track, and I was very naive about like all of the world at the time, and I was like, yeah, I'll just do that and pursue that, and then in the meantime I'll add journalism as a minor, and then I'll just be a beat writer until I get my big break, and then not realizing how hard that was. And yeah, and so I started kind of doing a little bit of stuff in journalism. I was like, you know what, I really like this too. And then I added it. I had a really good professor, Perry Farrell, who used to cover the Pistons for a long time for the Free Press, and I was like, you know what, I kind of want to do this. So did that. I was working in a restaurant for many many years after college, and kind of like doing things on the side as a freelancer for the news, and then ever since then, I've just had a kind of a series of right place, right time type of deals, and here I am. So yeah.
You're a Lions beat writer, but you seem to have an interest in pretty much every sport going. Is that fair?
Yeah, and when I was freelancing, because I freelanced for the news for like 5 years before I got hired full time, and I was general assignment. So I've always loved pretty much all sports across the board growing up. So that was kind of an easy thing for me to manage. I had a Red Wings podcast for a little bit in there. Um, and I would say the only one I didn't have like a super deep knowledge of was basketball. The Pistons were so bad for so long, I just kind of stopped paying attention to the sport for a little bit. But yeah, and I really liked that aspect of my job where they kind of asked me to do a little bit of everything. I did Lions game days with Justin Rogers. I did, a lot of Tiger stuff, some Red Wing stuff for the podcast, and then I ended up covering Detroit City Football Club. We call it soccer, obviously, but I fell in love with that sport too. So I love sports across the board, and I think that one thing that really helps me in my job right now is the fact that like the second I'm talking about a team that I'm not covering, which basically any team except for the Lions, I basically just like become the irrational fan that like is often pops up in my mentions. So like I got a lot of sympathy for the for maybe some of the crazies out there, because I am a crazy myself in a lot of different facets. And I think it was like a couple minutes into the Pistons Knicks series, and I was like, well, the refs clearly want the Knicks to win, and it's just like those kind of opinions.
Should
So
have called the
yeah.
foul on the three. Come on.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, that's kind of where I am today. Still I watch Tigers pretty much every night, and yeah, love all sports.
I mean, the best team in baseball.
That's right. That's
Apparently.
right. Who would have
Apart
thought?
from there being a bit of a cakewalk start, a little bit though, wasn't there? Did they play some early easy teams early? I think.
I think it was actually the opposite, because they started off with like the Dodgers, the Yankees. I think the Mariners were supposed to be pretty good this year. I think they have been pretty good this year. So, it was kind
Wow.
of one of those things that was like, if they're still like treading water after this brutal stretch, that's going to be a good thing. And then, turns out they did a whole lot more than that.
Yeah, incredible run. Let's turn our attention to the Lions then. So you kind of did a bit of all of the sports. Did you know football was the direction you wanted to go, or was it just an avenue which opened up for you a bit more than the others? How did it kind of come to pass that you ended up doing this full time?
Well, it's so yeah, I would say like football is always the sport that I like. I admired the most, and I like the most. It's obviously it just feels so big. The games are so limited, and like I said, when I was a freelancer, I was going to all the home games every year as kind of Justin Rogers' little sidekick. And I'd be like, "What do you want me to write?" And he's like, "Write this." And I'm like, "Okay, I got it." And so later on, when we opened up a position at the News, which was very fortunate because it's been so many years since that has happened that they've added a position rather than taking one away. It was kind of to do a little bit of everything, but mainly for like 80% of the year, it was to be Justin's like sidekick on the beat and help him out. And it just so happened to coincide with the greatest stretch of football in Lions history. So I got a lot of opportunities that way. And when he ended up going off to start his own company. I was just again kind of right place, right time. I had experience on the beat. I had some ideas that would work within the framework of what we had been doing, and so it all worked out. But yeah, I mean, if I had to work in any other league other than the National Football League, I don't know if I would do it, having experienced the life in the NFL, because the work-life balance is incredible. You know, obviously during the fall and winter, it can be a little bit tough when they're playing on Christmas or things like that. But it just feels so big, and everything you do when you get to that time of year just feels so important. And not even from a myself standpoint, it just like I just enjoy being a part of that, and it's incredible. I wouldn't want to work in any other league.
And talking about the Lions, do you have any kind of early memories which pop out to you as having watched them in years gone by? I mean, I presume, given your age, you kind of grew up with Barry, especially potentially the back end of his career, maybe.
No, I was young, so I'm only 28. So I was born in 96. I think Barry retired
Wow,
like
yeah,
3 years
yeah,
later.
yeah, yeah.
So
98,
I
yeah.
have like very vague memories of watching the team in like the early to mid 2000s, but nothing that really sticks out up until that 0 and 16 year, which I kind of remember a little bit vividly. And then Stafford got here the next year, and they already had Calvin. Actually, before the 0 and 16 year, I remember Calvin Johnson being drafted number 2. I remember where I was. I was in the car with my dad coming back from baseball. But so that is kind of like my earliest like concrete memory. And then I lived through some good teams, you know, in those couple of years with Stafford. They got to the back to the playoffs in 2011. There's the famous Monday night game against the Bears where they blew the roof off the place. I was at that game, so had a lot of good years when I was a kid watching that team and getting to experience those things with my dad. And you know, they never won anything of consequence, but it was still a really fun time. And so that kind of shaped my football fandom. But I love the NFL at large, I would say, for sure. Definitely during my younger days as well.
And is there an article through your career so far that sticks out to you as one that you're exceptionally proud of having done, or you think maybe the pinnacle of your career so far?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a couple of like favorite ones that I've written, and one of them being the one that I did before the NFC Championship last year. It's still my pinned tweet on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it, where basically, you know, there was kind of this narrative that Jared Goff, he was broken by the Rams, and it's so unbelievable. He reinvented himself and all this other stuff, and then you go to kind of learn about him and what he was like in high school and what he was like at Cal, and you realize that this is really just a continuation of the same guy that he had been from earlier in his career. And obviously having the chance to do that story on such an important piece of this turnaround at such a consequential time of that season, what was absolutely magical. Like it's crazy to think, and I said this the second that they lost that game to the 49ers. I was like, it'll never be like this again. Like it'll never feel like this again, for better, for worse. And it was just so surreal to watch that whole 2023 season. So I would say that one's probably up there for me. I did another story that I did earlier this year, right around Christmas time, on a special connection between the Lions defensive line coaches, the assistant Cam Davis, and the top guy Terrell Williams, who has since departed to New England. But basically, they had met kind of by coincidence at a shopping mall, and would like long before Cam Davis ever got close to the NFL, and he was working at some department store, and he kind of just approached him, and he was like, "Hey, like, how do I get into coaching? Like, I really want to coach D line," and that got the wheels turning, and then 10, 15 years later, they were working together. So that's another one that I've really enjoyed telling probably in the last year or so.
Ashley, you want to jump in with one of yours?
Yeah, so I know obviously you've mentioned a couple of times through that it's been like sort of right place, right time. But if you were to give someone who does want to sort of make that jump to sort of beat writing, what's that sort of like one big piece of advice you can give them just to give them that push? Is it kind of work those right time, right place kind of things, work those connections, or is there a more holistic thing that maybe they should do?
Yeah, and I think like for as much like luck as I had, and like I truly do believe that I've had so much luck throughout my career, I still was ready to kind of meet the opportunity each time. And you know, there was a point in my career like earlier on when I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna end up in like real journalism, or if I'm just gonna go like a podcast, like fan podcast route, kind of like you guys are doing, because I was doing that with the Red Wings podcast, and I enjoyed that as well. But what I would say, and this probably isn't like the best advice, but like this, I had a number of forks in the road where it was like, well, you're not making a lot of money right now. This opportunity just presented itself. Um, should you take it and kind of get a little bit more comfortable in the meantime? And I kind of shied away from the getting more comfortable things. It was just a lot of times it was a gut feel of like, hey, there's this moment where I have to choose something. What decision is going to help me get closer to my ultimate goal? And I didn't even know 100% what it was at that time. Like I never thought that like Justin would be leaving the news. So it wasn't like, oh, I want to be a beat writer for a newspaper. There's only a couple of them. And, the ones that were there were pretty dang good. So, I would say just stay in sports. That's one big thing, is like if you get out of sports, you just want to be consistently doing things, being around, meeting people. And I've never even been like a big networking guy. Like I'm kind of introverted in a lot of different spaces. And so it's not like I was like going out and whatever. If you can do that, that would be that's very helpful. But a lot of the stuff was just like, hey, kind of let your work speak for itself. I remember it was funny, like Justin said, like the first 3 years I knew you didn't say a word except for like, yes, sir, got it, or something along those lines. And but just staying in sports and staying around and kind of just making sure that you're always pivoting from these opportunities without straying too far from the task at hand, because I know a lot of people who are like up and coming sports writers, and then they took a job and it just didn't necessarily work out for them to where they were able to get back, or something like that. And that makes me a bit sad because a lot of those people are really, really good at what they do. So I would say stay in sports, read as much as you can, and just try to emulate like the people that you respect and like to read, and think about like what kind of content do I like, and then how can I transfer my admiration for that type of content into content that people will hopefully like for me.
A lot of sense. There's a really good question I had in from Ian Carr on a Lions UK WhatsApp group that we have here. He asks, after covering one of the worst franchises in football, what are the biggest differences you've noticed in the fan base, your role, says as a beat writer, but obviously that is relatively recent, and the organisation as a whole now we're one of the better teams?
That's a great question. I would say for my role, it's a lot like the draft coverage happens a lot later. That's the first thing that comes to mind, is like I remember there was one year where I think it was 2022, and I was just talking to Justin after one of the games. I think it might have been the Dolphins game where they went to like 1-5 or 1-6 or something like that. He's like, "Well, guess I'm releasing a mock draft this week because nothing ever changes." And I think that's the big thing that jumps out to me, is just like you're always kind of locked in on the here and now, which is really good, because then you don't feel like you feel like every moment is worth it, worth observing. And I think that makes for better content to come out of that, and a better fan experience as well. As far as the fan base goes, I have a hard time naming anything because I think that like I think that what you're seeing is like from the fan base, I would say the only difference is like they just believe that like guys will want to come here, which isn't really a big thing, but like every guy that's kind of available, like a Crosby or a Garrett or every guy who appears available, like I think a lot of Lions fans like think that they're coming here and stuff like that. So
We're getting
that's
Trey
been a
Hendrickson, right? That's still happening.
that's right. Yeah. No, exactly. But I don't really think that that's like all that different from every other fan base. You know, that's something that I don't know. I think a lot of different fan bases too. I would say another thing is just like the implicit trust that Lions fans have in Brad Holmes, and I'm kind of right there too when it comes to the draft classes and stuff like that. You know, I think before when they were a bad team, you would see them draft somebody and you would like kind of look at all the negatives and be like, well, that's not going to work. Even if it's a guy who's a good prospect, there's still like this air of like, well, they're going to ruin him, you know. So what does it even matter anyways? And I think it's a little bit flipped around now to where um when the Lions drafted Isaac Tisla, one of my first thoughts wasn't, oh my gosh, what is he doing? It was more intrigue of like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what is he seeing him? And I think a lot of fans, there's always going to be a vocal minority who kind of go in the other direction, but I think a lot of fans also feel that way at this stage of Brad Holmes' tenure.
Feels like he takes big swings with later picks. It's like, oh no, he's taken a terrible, terrible risk with a fairly a good amount of draft capital, but all of his first round picks seem to have a really high floor. And then maybe some of the later round picks tend to be a bit more boom or bust, but the boom is very high. And therefore,
Yeah.
who cares if he misses?
Right, exactly. And that, like I think that that's something that fans like to point out are some of his recent misses like Hooker and Martin, and I think that both of those guys probably have at least one more year before I can confidently say like one way or the other what they are. But yeah, and if you look at like a lot of his late round draft picks, they have still hit for the most part, and his hit rate is undeniably awesome. So, yeah.
Mm. Ash, do you want to take one?
Yeah, so and obviously as you're always a beat writer, you probably get to interact with some of the coaches. Obviously, you mentioned the Terrell Williams story earlier. Are there some coaches that are sort of better to work with, inverted commas, as a writer, are there some fun stories maybe with trying to grill little bits of information out the ones that aren't, or like just good stories from interacting with the coaches?
Yeah, I would say most of the coaches like they kind of come they like they're cut from a similar cloth as Campbell. And like Campbell is probably the easiest head coach in the NFL to deal with from a media perspective. We every year there's joint practices and we'll be talking to the you know the other beat that's there and they'll leave the Dan Campbell press conference. They'll be like, you guys deal with this every day. Like you just get this guy up here every day to talk to him, and I think we are really fortunate in that sense that he really doesn't have the ability to lie, and he's one of the worst liars I've ever seen in my entire life, which I think is a good thing for us because you can kind of ask him something and like his only tell to like I shouldn't be talking about this is he'll start rubbing his neck or he'll start smacking the side of the podium. But even then, like those ticks or whatever you want to call them, like they don't help. He still is gonna blurt it out anyways. Um, and you know, I would say like Aaron Glenn, there was always a little bit of like a give and take where like it felt like when they played well, he would be in a grumpy mood when we talked to him, and when they were playing bad, he would be in a good mood when we talked to him. So that was always a fun thing of like, you know, sometimes I felt like he was just out to disagree a little bit on certain premises and stuff like that. But otherwise, you know, him and Ben Johnson, I think were great to talk to. Just thinking about some other guys. I mean, and like I said, a lot of the guys that they've had in recent years have been really good talkers. One of the only ones who wasn't, and I don't think he would take any offense to this because I feel like there was a certain element of like him just trying to shut us down with Steve Hyden, the tight ends coach last year, who's now with the New York Jets. He would always like it would be you just be fighting for your life because every question that he would ask would be probably like 5 to 10 seconds long of an answer, but it always sounded like he was about to say something that was insightful. It'd be like, oh, Sam Laporta playing really well. I don't know. So whatever question, he'd be like, yeah, Sam is playing really well. And you'd be like, oh, come on, like, can you give us a little bit more than that? But no, like I said, I think for the most part, they have had a lot of really good talkers as coaches, and that's only kind of continuing on this year with Tashard Choice. I mean, we just talked to him for the other day for the first time. He was awesome. Tyler Roll, the new tight ends coach, was fantastic. Sorry, 1 second. I just got to plug in my computer here. But yeah, I would say from that standpoint, we are very fortunate because a lot of the coaches have no problem, talking to the media, which is good.
Got a question from Contrapastan, which asked about the new locker room. Have you been able to see it in person yet? Because it got some rave reviews.
I have not seen it, but I can tell you that it was long, long overdue because that locker room looked like it was built. It looked like basically they hadn't altered it since the day that they built it. Like it was very just like 1990s, and in terms of just like the wooden lockers that looked like they hadn't changed it forever. Guys didn't really have a whole lot of space in there. So that's something I'm actually really excited to see because it looks like an Alabama like locker room in there. It looks like the boosters of the Lions, whoever they may be, were the ones, kind of going deep for that. But yeah, I'm excited to see that one next year.
I feel bad because when we went to the draft, we went to the Ford Field day one thing and we queued up to go into the locker room and it's like, oh, it's already gone. Ash?
Yeah, so obviously we just mentioned the sort of the coaches and that, but looking at the front office, I know we've had a couple of people sniped away over the past couple of years, but two of the sort of bigger names, especially Ray Agnew, who I know obviously has been to the development accelerator program, which I know has been paused this year. They're trying to redo it because of stuff maybe like him. Him and Disner they didn't really get much buzz this offseason. Is there a kind of the talent that we could take from the Detroit office is already being taken and now we need to let them develop again? Or is it kind of there were bigger names out there and our guys just slipped under the radar, thankfully?
Yeah, I think that it's probably more of the case of the latter there. I think Disner is really good at his job, basically from everything we've seen so far. I mean, that Kirby contract that came through the other day, that was a masterpiece. And then Ray Agnew too. It is kind of surprising that he's still here. I think one thing is maybe both of those guys, from what I can tell, and I have far less experience with Disner than I do with Agnew, but Agnew is just kind of quiet, and I know that that's something that he is kind of looking for in his career, given the fact that he has gone through these programs, and I think he might have even interviewed for a job or two in the last few years. But I don't think it's an indictment on their ability or maybe who they are as people. I just wonder. It's a good question because I do wonder how Agnew hasn't been plucked yet, considering all the acclaim that Brad Holmes has gotten and the fact that Agnew's not only his right-hand man now, but also had experience working with him at his past stop too, which is another place that gets rated pretty frequently. So hard to say on that, but I think those are honestly just two of the stronger talents you have in that front office right now. So I would not be surprised if this time next year we're having a completely different conversation about where they are and where they're going.
Be one way of replacing the third round picks we traded for Tesla.
That's right. That's right.
We got a question from Colton, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it, but Carlton Wood, who's in the chat at the moment, asked whether you have had a question you've really wanted to ask, and after some thought, you've decided to pull back from asking that question. And I don't know whether that might be because you are needing to be diplomatic. It might be a political thing, not in terms of politics, but in terms of like your internal politics in the room, or whether it's maybe that you had two really good questions and you just can't ask that one, or I don't know. Is there a reason that sometimes you hold back?
No, not really. I would say a good example of a reason why I would is, so have you guys read the book Soconomics or heard of it or whatever?
Yeah.
So there's this one chapter in the book that talks about game theory and penalty kicks. And the whole I know that you know what I know, but you don't know that I know what you know, and that whole game. And when you think about it, that's play calling. Every single
Mm.
play is a one-off, game like that. And that was something that I felt like Ben Johnson did such a good job of just like the timely play calls. And it was like, you think of the Brock Wright catch and run against the Jets a couple years ago, and it was, wow, they used this play 3 times earlier in the game, but then this time they're going to have the tight end leak out. He hadn't done that all season on that play, and he just waited for the perfect time to do it. And I felt like that was something that we saw from him over and over and over again. And I remember I was reading that chapter of the book, and I was like, man, like this, like just simply knowing, like being in your opponent's head and knowing that they're trying to get in yours and still managing to kind of make the right play call more often than not, I thought was super impressive. And I remember because I had read this probably early on in last offseason, and I was like, man, like I would love to figure out a way to like learn this, because as we've covered earlier, I had a 1.2 in stats class, was not the best with numbers. And if you read my content, I don't go super heavy into like the DVOA, the EPA per play. Like I think it's all very valuable, but it's, as it pertains to like making the charts and stuff, I kind of that's somebody else's bag. But I always thought like Ben Johnson having this background in computer science and all that stuff, like there's no way that he's not using this math to give himself an artistic advantage, and I think that was what was beautiful about it, is he seemed to blend what looked like fine art with a little bit of science, or maybe it was even, vice versa. But I never felt like I understood the top. I wanted to do it with him as like a feature in training camp or something like that, but I never felt like I would get to the point where I understood it enough to like hold a conversation with him. And I also felt like he probably would not talk about it. So I kind of like broached the topic with their PR, and I kind of just never really ended up pursuing it. Um, which disappoints me because now he's gone. And I think somebody from ESPN actually ended up writing that story about how he manages to blend like that math and science after I left. So I would say that's the only thing. That's really the only time when I hold back, because at the end of the day, like when it comes to hard questions, right? Like let's say, when Jameson Williams was having a rough time in his sophomore season, somebody's going to ask that question because it has to be asked. That's what fans want to know about. And I think one way to keep your respect among the peers you're working with is to make sure that you're not always just letting somebody else ask those harder questions. So I would say most of the times that I hold back, it's out of fear of like, am I missing a really obvious answer to this question that I'm going to be embarrassed about with the player, or like in a way that they might view it as like disrespectful to me for me to add, and a lot of times it's just it's worrying that I, am not necessarily approaching a question from a player's perspective.
Really interesting insight.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those things. I live in constant fear of being embarrassed. I think I remember. I think it was
Same. You and me both.
Well, I think it was Colton Pouncy's first interview, press conference, and his phone went off, and Dan Campbell was like, "Who's that?" And then lets him off scot-free. But I can imagine that there would be some head coaches who would be like, "That's the guy whose phone went off." Do you know what I mean? There'd be some more unfriendly environments.
Patricia, even the I was gonna say the last guy who was there, I don't know if he would have necessarily been so kind about that. And that's such a funny story because I think Colton's awesome. He actually lives 2 floors above me, and has kind of become a good friend of mine over the last few years. So that whole thing, like being on Hard Knocks, chronicled forever, is just so funny to me.
Ash, do you have another one?
Yeah, so I know obviously it's kind of got a bit macro, but with the Miami Vice uniforms being teased for the Miami Dolphins with this new rivalries, color rush that obviously got announced during the draft that the NFL's moving towards. What if the team came to you and said, we're having a bit of trouble coming up with an idea here? what would you pull from the sort of local culture and that to make the rivalry's uniform? And why should it be the teal uniforms that the Pistons had?
That's a great question. I've given a little bit of thought to this. I mean the teal is sitting right there, and I also the teal is the or I don't know if it's technically teal, but it's that seafoam green or whatever you want to call it is also the color of the Spirit of Detroit statue,
Mhm.
which Detroit City FC drew inspiration from when designing their road kits a year or two ago, and I thought that looked phenomenal. Those are the two colors that jump out to me. Maybe you draw from the flag, which I think is red, white, and blue, and maybe a little bit of gold. Um, Other than that, though, that's a good question because I haven't really put too much thought into it. And I think that those jerseys are really like I like encourage teams to take chances, but like the Tigers, for example, I think it's kind of a adjacent to the City Connect thing that they got going on. Their
Yeah,
City Connect jersey is absolutely terrible.
agreed.
And as much as I think you should like lean into like the car culture and stuff like that, I also feel like that one is just it was kind of hacky in a little bit of a way
Yeah.
and I hate it. So I'm interested to see what they do for that because I do think that they should probably go in a different direction with the color and between the Pistons teal uniforms and the Spirit of Detroit statue. I think that like a teal or like aqua green or whatever you want to call it makes a lot of sense. I think that would be a lot of fun because I don't know what other direction they would go with that because they have had the gray in the past. Like if they didn't have those recently in their uniform history, I think that would be kind of a layup. But between that and then having the black uniforms now, I think they will have to get a little bit creative with that.
Yeah, because I know obviously Detroit City FC did theirs with the goalkeeper uniforms this year, where one's inspired by the Honolulu blue of the Lions and the other is that teal. And I wish you could get them over here because unfortunately I do not have the money to buy both of those. I'm very happy that I did get one of the away ones when we went over. That's currently in the wash downstairs, unfortunately, I was be wearing it. But yeah, just something like that because I'm a sucker for buying those kind of things. I've got an old Joe Bly jersey up there. I've got all three uniforms in there, even though Fanatics over here messed up the colours on the sleeves on my Kirby Joseph
Oh
jersey.
no. Don't even get me
Yeah.
started on Fanatics. Don't even get me started. So can I ask you guys how did
Yeah.
you end up as Lions fans? When did this begin? I know you've probably been asked this a million times, probably told on the podcast a million times, so you can tell it as fast as you feel like you need to, but I'm very curious.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So for me, it was way back 13 years ago. Jesus. 13 years ago at school, me and my friends at school discovered this thing called Madden Mobile back when that was actually a good game, had more
Nice.
career mode than anything. And they all had their teams. We had one that was a Seattle fan, one was a Saints fan, one was a Packers fan. I got into it a bit late and sort of big teams that kind of left with the Steelers and the Lions. And I was like, hang on, this Detroit's very similar to where I grew up, which is Birmingham over here, former industrial heartland, famous for making cars. We made British Leyland, Rover, and all that. Also, my favourite football team, not Liverpool, unfortunately, but Aston Villa, blue in the colours, Lions, and the thing. It just had all these connections. And obviously, Birmingham's also got a bit of a music scene, and obviously with Detroit with Motown. There was just a lot of connections. And fortunately, it was 2012, 20, and then going to 2014 was when I really got into it. And yeah, the pain of that infamous loss against the Dallas Cowboys cemented it as a Villa fan. I'm used to that pain. I was like,
Right.
this is home for me. And luckily, both teams have had an upswing. And now we're looking a bit better. But yeah, just
Yeah,
suckered me in like that, and now been held captive ever since.
For me,
that's
I
funny.
I got into the team similar time kind of to you ish in terms of '08 happened, 0 and 16, and I kind of came to the sport then. I played rugby a lot at that age,
Mm.
so I knew oval ball sports would probably suit me anyway. And I was at university, so started playing some Madden. And Detroit always defaulted to the team to play because then they had the number of overall picks. So you play with Stafford and whatever. So I kind of got to know the players a bit, watched a couple of games, fell in love with that team specifically. So favorite player from that era, DeAndre Levy, who couldn't stay healthy, but man, he was a good football
Yeah.
player. And the Sue, I mean, Sue had Sue before
Ronaldo.
Ronaldo.
Yeah,
took it,
right.
which is a shame.
Yeah.
Every time I hear that with Cristiano Ronaldo, I'm like, it's not yours. It's not yours. I really loved Kyle van den Bosch. I have no idea why.
He was
But
a beast.
yeah, he was. Yeah, Delmas at the back was really great too. Cliff Averill, who obviously came and chat on the team afterwards for a long time, but he was a great player too. So no, the defense of that team was just incredible. And I did go and see some of the London games when the Lions came over and won with the final kick of the game, which was fantastic for that. But Calvin was injured. He was my favourite player at the time and missed that game. And then he promptly retired after that. Then the Chiefs game happened. That wasn't so fun. But, you know, it's been a labour of love. Madden and being the worst team of football and not wanting to be the Man United glory hunting, Patriots fan supporting type of thing was like Detroit was partly a protest vote and then became something I absolutely adored. So
I love that. I love that. The power of video games is really crazy. But I respect that a lot because I actually with you not wanting to pick a good team because I definitely did that when I picked my English football team. And I kind of felt a little bit guilty about it. So I like recently became a Liverpool fan like 3 years ago, probably. And I remember I was like, man, I've never had to pick a team before. So that's why I'm always curious about you got like every team that I rooted for, I kind of grew up with. And I was like, how do I do this? And it took me like an entire summer, but I really wanted to like, I wanted something, a tradition that I could go see. And, hearing like their entire stadium sing "You'll Never Walk Alone" was like so captivating to me, and I was like, nah, you can't pick them. Like that, you know, from everything I'd read and heard about, like they're kind of in the upper echelon. Obviously I know a bit more about that now, and you know, despite the fact that I think they just won their second Premier League title in the last however many years or maybe ever. Again,
yeah,
not extremely well versed.
Mhm.
But I was like, you know what? Like I kind of got to the point where I was like, you know what? If that's not a good enough reason to like pick a club or a team, like what is? And having watched like 7 years of Detroit sports teams just be absolutely garbage, I was like, you know what? I think I earned a front runner to root for. So couldn't have imagined it would have worked out as well as it did. It was very funny. I kept trying to get congratulations from my other Premier League friends about the title, and they were like, just knock it off, just knock it off, you didn't earn this. And I was like, oh.
So much like Ash was saying that Birmingham is similar to Detroit, but Liverpool very much is too. There's something about being at the city, at the dock, and looking over the Mersey on the water, and when the sun is shining, you can almost imagine kind of looking down into Windsor, and you know, there's a very similar feel to that, and very industrial, and the people there, the salt of the earth type grinders, it really feels similar.
Yeah, I gathered that too throughout the like this is in the early stages of just like, you know, it does feel like they kind of, it feels like it's Liverpool versus everybody, at least with like the people from that town and stuff like that. And I like that too, you know. So
I mean, they do regard themselves as not really part of England. It has
Right.
gone to an extreme, as in they boo the national anthem when it's played and stuff like that, which is interesting when that happens because it
Yeah.
always evokes some outrage. I think that maybe Americans would feel more strongly about that than us over here because it's not there's no, we show our patriotism I think in a very different way, but it's still something which is kind of frowned upon. But given what's happened to them over the years and decades, and I'm sure you'll probably hear more of it as you become more of a fan, but they have had a hard time of it.
Yes, and I do know a little bit about like kind of all that stuff. So I've definitely like I watched the Hillsborough documentary, and I mean that stuff is all just so crazy and terrible, and you definitely can draw the parallels I think between those two teams. Besides the winning so far,
but it's coming. One question on that in a minute. One more before that. Ash, do you have any questions before I get to a last two here? No. Okay, so Brian Shook had a good question just about our new coordinators. So yeah, he asked, a lot has been made of our coordinators departing. What do you think of Morton and Shepherd in their new roles? Obviously, we haven't seen them for very long. Morton has been here before. Shepherd has obviously been here for much longer and for a continuous period of time. But both interesting and very different people.
100%. I guess we'll start with Morton because big shoes to fill both of them do, but I think just the precedent that Ben Johnson set over those 3 seasons was, I mean, it was sensational. And the fact that they were able to keep him for that long, I think they were so fortunate for that to happen. And as I just mentioned, like talking to him in press conferences and stuff like that, just one thing that jumped off, he just seemed like so like dialed in and calculated. Like he really did seem like that, like computer guy who was just, he happened to apply it to football. And I don't get the sense that that's necessarily John Morton's approach, is maybe like the scientific approach of it. But what I will say is, this is a guy that is very well respected by Dan Campbell, John Gruden, Sean Payton. Gruden and Payton are obviously, two of the more respected offensive minds of a generation. So I think all of those things in tandem make him really intriguing. And the fact that, yes, he was here in that 2022 season when they did start to turn it all around. And the fact that I think Dan Campbell probably had a little bit more to do with the offense than he has been given credit for over these last couple of years, because when they had that really hot stretch to close the 2021 season, it was him calling the plays. It was him kind of running the show on that side of things. And he mentioned it kind of as, I think it was like the day that Ben Johnson was officially hired by the Bears. He was like, for the first time, he was like, now let's not forget, like, offense is kind of my bread and butter. So I think kind of that whole thing with Campbell, with Morton, I think is going to be a really good relationship. And if it doesn't, like, I think one thing that you can take solace in is the fact that Dan Campbell is a guy who, with his back against the wall, fired his offensive coordinator, who was very well respected as an offensive mind, and Anthony Lynn, and kind of did what was necessary. And then the very next season, the secondary is not playing very well. He fires defensive backs coach Aubrey Pleasant, and that whole thing turned around. And so I think I
One
think
more
there's
as well. Special teams coordinator went after not following orders.
That was Patricia Braden
Oh,
Coombs.
sorry, my mistake. Sorry.
Yeah.
So we have a history of it anyway.
That's good recall though. But yeah, and I mean, like, I think there's reason to believe it works out, but there's also reason to believe that it'll be okay if it doesn't go necessarily to as well as Ben Johnson did off the rip. And I think that there's a chance that maybe they have some early season struggles too. I mean, they were still prone to that when Ben Johnson was here, but I think given the fact that a lot of things are going to be the same on that side of the ball, sorry, I'm rambling a bit here, but like the fact that all of the guys that we talked to last week, because we talked to a lot of the offensive coaches, and all of them said like, yeah, we're not changing much. We're not changing much. I don't think you can really talk like that if you didn't have a lot to do with the offense in the first place. And so that's one thing that I don't know if I'm reading too much into that, but just something I'm keeping an eye on in that sense. And then on the opposite side of the ball, I think there's going to be a lot of continuity there too. And Kelvin Shepherd is a guy who came in, and by all accounts, he was put on the fast track to get to where he is now, and to be able to rise to the top in a room, in a coaching staff that has a lot of good talent on it. I mean, you saw the way that they were poached this year. I think is very, very encouraging. The players love Shep. And just like they did Aaron Glenn, I am curious to see kind of if they do run as much man. I think that's kind of like the one thing that everybody's got an eye on, because Aaron Glenn, I think he did love his cornerbacks, like challenging people and kind of building the defense with that in mind. I'm curious to see what his number one priority is in terms of how he, deploys that. Do they play as much man? Do they play a little bit more zone? Because, maybe they're thinking about how to get their front to the quarterback more so than how can we cover for as long as possible. But I think for the most part, you're going to see a lot of the same team that you have in these last couple of years, at least stylistically on both sides of the ball.
The overlooked thing, perhaps, in that conversation is that the whole thing with designing the offense was, let's make Jared Goff great, or let's empower him to do more, let's let him call more plays, and he's still there. Like,
yeah, yes.
Goff is becoming his own OC in part. So I don't see how this can go particularly wrong, to be honest. The only thing I wonder is, which is something we talked about before, is whether, okay, it stays the same now, teams figure you out. where does the invention then come in later on in the season when perhaps things start to go wrong? If you do have a couple of losses on the bounce, which we haven't done in a while, then can you add something in your bag? Because Ben always looked like he had something left. Whereas, do they have that sort of creation to them? And I think Morton having a hand in creating the scheme in the first place would seem to suggest that he can do that. But Goff is the piece of the puzzle completely being overlooked, I think.
I 100% agree with that. And, there are still some coaches left over from, Mark Brunell is still here. I think that's pretty big. And then I think the fact that a lot of these hires, they have experience like working hand in hand, either playing quarterback or working with quarterbacks. They added Bruce Gradkowski, who had a career in the league. They added Marcus Tuiasa-Sopo, who's been around the league. So, yeah, I think as long as your quarterback position is right and your offensive line is right, which again, they just added some more talent into it and they kept Hank Fraley, which I think, I think everything else can kind of just take care of itself. And Ben Johnson even said after he was hired by the Bears, he said it doesn't matter who's calling that offense anymore. Like that system is so good. And I think that's a nod to maybe the involvement that Campbell had in it.
Okay, final one is just looking ahead to what might be this season. Obviously, the schedule's out. We're going to be reacting to that very shortly. You guys already have on your podcast. It obviously looks like it might be a little bit more difficult this year, although obviously lots of teams change year to year. What's your reasonable expectations for the season coming?
I think I had them go. I did a game by game prediction over at DetroitNews.com. I ended up with them going 12-5 because it's a really hard schedule. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of those teams, I just looked at them and I was going through and I was like, the Lions are just better, and I think they're better than the Bengals. They're as good as the Ravens. They're as good as the Chiefs. If you just say you split the ones that you're even with, and then go 50-50 on the rest of them. I think you split the teams that you're even with, and then you just beat the teams that you're better than, which is something that this team has had zero issue with the last 2 years, outside of, a couple contests against the Bears in 23. I think in a lot of ways they're going to be the same team. And I think that that's probably one of the defining traits of Dan Campbell's tenure is it doesn't matter who they're playing. It doesn't matter where they're playing. They're going to be the same team. And given the record that they had in the division last year, I don't know if that's even really that much a concern. Given the record they've had in the division for the last 2-3 years, they've performed really well against the NFC North. So if you can handle those games, you've got a pretty easy road schedule for the most part. And then, just do semi-decent on the road, which they went undefeated on the road last year. So no reason to believe that they won't. I don't know. I probably should be a little more cautiously optimistic, but I feel like this head coach is somebody that I feel like is going to figure it out. They still got a lot of pieces in place. And at the end of the day, they have the better players than most every team that they're going to play next year, outside of a few games where they might not have the better quarterback, or the other team's defense might be slightly better. But I just think at the end of the day, this is still such a good football team. It's hard to really see things going bad unless one of the coordinator transitions is just an absolute disaster, which I also really don't see happening.
Makes sense. All right, someone's asked a question about the scheduling, but you've reacted to that over on your podcast, so it seems like a great opportunity for you to tell us about that show, and if you've got any articles on the news coming up as well that we should be aware of.
Yeah, it's called the Gridiron Gang Podcast, but it's spelled Grit Iron Gang, Gritiron. So that comes out. We record every Wednesday. It usually comes out either Wednesday night or Thursday. First thing Thursday morning, it'll be ready in your podcast player. And then as far as the next couple of days, it's really just going to be a lot of stuff coming out of OTAs, coming out of the just the off-season program. We talked to, like I said, probably 15 offensive and defensive coaches over the last couple of days. Obviously, you can't put all that out the day of, so we're going to be rolling that out kind of over the next couple of weeks here and into the summer. But yeah, I would say that that's the thing to look out for. We're going to be covering the upcoming off-season program pretty intensely, and before you know it, we'll be in the dead period, which can't believe it's already almost here. But yeah,
Yeah, at least the weather's getting better. So
yeah. And I did have one more thing for you guys,
Sure.
because I heard a question on the podcast about coming over to Detroit. Like what I would echo some of your guys' opinions about the secondary market. That is where I buy all my tickets. Like I would say that there's like four that I would use. It's StubHub, the Ticketmaster resale that you mentioned, SeatGeek, then the one I use is called TickPick, TICK Pick. Um, that is seemingly the most consistently low prices that I see. But I would say, just generally speaking, if you're worried about shopping on a secondary market, because I know it doesn't really exist over there, don't be worried about it. I actually bought Europa League final tickets on a secondary market last year, and it was terrifying. Up until I was in my seat, I was worried that I was not going to get into the stadium. But the secondary market over here is probably your best bet if you're trying to come see a game.
Fantastic. That makes sense. I can't wait to come back over, although all the stuff with the border and Europeans getting held has me worried a little bit coming over for another game. But hey, anyway,
Yeah.
Hopefully that will be soon. Nolan, hang right there. We're just going to come off the air here. Guys in the chat, we'll be back reacting to the schedule release in about 30 to 45 minutes time. So look out for the links for that one. Nolan, thank you so much for coming on. Absolute joy to meet you and talk with you. Guys in the chat, fantastic for your questions. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Ash, thank you for doing this for me. And we'll see you soon in a little bit, guys. Cheers.
Recording
me.
stopped.
All right. That